I was about 13 years old when this strange incident happened. Let me give you some details about my life back then. I lived in a simple part of the town where there were many houses and buildings close to each other. Most of my buddies had older brothers and sisters who were friends with my older sister, Amy. Oh, how much fun Amy and her pals had, laughing and joking whenever me and my group tried to join them while they played in our area. One summer day, my buddies and I decided to spend our day by the local swimming pool, which was in a building just a short walk from my home. We had so much fun that day, playing and laughing in the water. When the swimming pool was about to close, one of my friends had a great idea to play a big game of tag. We decided to meet in front of the pool entrance to start our game, but first we wanted to change into our regular clothes. As my buddy, who we'll name Jane, and I were rushing to her house to change, we suddenly saw a strange bright light. We stopped and looked around trying to find where it came from. Thinking it might have been just the light from a car, we continued to run to Jane's house. A while later, after our game of tag, we all gathered near Jane's house to chat. That's when Jane asked, "Did anyone else see that weird light while running earlier?" Everyone stopped talking. We all exchanged glances, realizing we had seen the same thing. "I saw it too. Thought it was just a police car or something," I replied, not completely sure of what I had seen. Then, as we were talking, we all saw another bright light. We all turned to look and saw another flash, this time coming from a window of the building nearby. Suddenly, one of our friends, a boy named Mike, started shouting towards the window, making fun of whoever was up there and even showing them a thumbs down. Boys his age often did silly things like that. Well, after Mike did that, things got worse. The person who was taking those light flashes came out. And guess what? It was the neighborhood's odd guy. Let me tell you about this man. He was known for walking around our area, always handing out ice pops, candies, and sweet things to kids. You might think this sounds like a scene from an old movie, right? He'd always do this when their parents weren't looking. Suddenly, this weird man began snapping a lot of pictures of us really fast. I shouted, pointing at him, "Hey, why are you taking photos of us?" My friends and I started shouting, telling him to stop it. But instead of stopping, he seemed even more excited and clicked away, taking even more photos. I then remembered my sister, Amy, was nearby with her buddies. I whispered to Jane, "Stay here. Try to keep him busy. I'll run and get Amy." Normally, it'd take me about 5 minutes to reach where my sister was. But that evening, it felt like I sprinted there in just a few seconds. I reached Amy, panting heavily and eyes full of tears, unable to speak. Amy looked at me, trying to understand. "Hey, breathe! What happened?" she asked, trying to sound calm. In a shaky voice, I managed to say, "Some guy is taking lots of photos of us." Amy's face went serious, a look I'd never seen before. Considering she's now a mom of a 6-year-old, that says a lot. She grabbed my hand. "Take me there," she said, almost dragging me along. As we got close to where my friends were, we saw a lot of bright lights. We could see Amy's friends running towards the lights. Amy told me to take my friends and quickly leave. Amy's voice sounded scared but firm. She told me to grab my friends and rush home, and that's what we did. "Don't look back, just run!" That's what she told me, and I did exactly that. I quickly grabbed Jane and her little sister and shouted at my buddies to run towards home. I never thought I could run that fast. It felt like my feet were flying over the ground. Now, when I recall that event, I kept wondering what happened to the creepy man with the camera after Amy and her friends chased him. I just couldn't remember. So I decided to give Amy a call to clear up the mystery. She picked up, and I asked her about that scary night. She said, "Oh yeah, I remember him." Turns out he had been snapping photos of us for a while before that day. I was shocked. She went on to say that I had been in some photos and that she recalls our cousin once throwing eggs at his place because of him. I was like, wow, this is a lot to take in. I asked her what happened on that particular night when she chased him. She said, "Me and my pals ran after him. We thought he dashed into the woods, but he tricked us and ran back to his place. Apparently, when a neighbor's mom found out about the photo-taking, creepy guy, she called the police. The guy tried to say he was catching us doing something wrong by the pool, but when the police arrived, they found loads of film rolls with pictures of us playing around the neighborhood. My mind was spinning. I had no clue about any of this before. I asked, "Did Mom know about this?" Amy said, "No," and the neighbor's mom told the police that she didn't want us to get involved any further, as it turned out to be some big, scary situation. It seems that the creepy guy got kicked out from his place, and a couple of years later, they filled in the pool with concrete to prevent any such incidents. As Amy shared this, I was trying to process the horrifying revelation. Oh my goodness, how did I not know any of this? I'm now forever grateful to the neighbor's mom for protecting us from a potentially worse scenario. Although it might not sound that frightening to some, to me it was a nightmare come to life. The chilling part is that such danger lurked so close without us even knowing. The lesson here is, we can never be too sure about who lives next door. Stay safe, everyone, and beware of creepy strangers because you never know what they might be up to. When I was younger, I had a neighbor named Mr. Brown who lived 2 houses away. In that house, Mr. Brown lived with his old and sick mom, Mrs. Brown. I didn't really know what illness she had, but she had been sick for as long as I can remember from my childhood. But this story is more about Mr. Brown than his mom. Here's a bit more about him. Mr. Brown had been in the army and had hurt his head, so he had a piece of metal in his head because of that injury. He had built something really unusual on his house. He used pieces of old metal he found and made an extra floor on his roof. There was also a long, slide-like pathway made of metal that started from the top and went all the way to the ground. I used to see him on that pathway often, and I always thought that was pretty cool. Mr. Brown had children, but for some reason he never saw them. I never found out why. His house had 2 big doors that opened to his basement. Every time I saw those doors, I'd think of some scary movie scene. Mr. Brown had a strange way of dressing. He wore a black t-shirt and black trousers every day, and he always had a smile that was a bit eerie. When I was a kid, I loved being outdoors. I'd play in my yard whenever I had the chance. And that's how I got to know Mr. Brown a bit more. When I was about 8, he started coming over to my yard. He would ask if I wanted to see a magic trick. I was a friendly kid and liked talking to grown-ups, but something about Mr. Brown made me a bit nervous. Even then, I knew that there was a reason he didn't see his kids. But I still said yes and watched his magic tricks. He'd often come over and show me tricks with cards and other things. As I grew up and became a teenager, he stopped showing me tricks. He would just come and chat with me. To be honest, I can't recall all the things we talked about. Even though he seemed nice and never did anything wrong, I still felt uneasy around him. I often sat outside on my porch late into the night, and during those times Mr. Brown had a habit of pointing a red laser light at me from his house. So, Mr. Brown had this red laser light that I think was from a toy for cats, definitely not from anything dangerous like a gun. But whenever he shined it at me while I was outside, it really scared me a lot. Most times, I would get up and go inside my house. I'd be too scared to stay out. But sometimes, even if I was scared, I'd stay outside just because I was so mad at Mr. Brown for doing that. After a while, Mr. Brown didn't come over to my yard to chat with me as often as he used to. Around this time, I had a pet cat. I named him Whiskers. Whiskers was all black, from the top of his head to the tip of his tail. I remember the day I got him. He was just a small kitten, and I had to go to a place far from home to get him. I got him because his mother had been hit by a car, and he needed a new home. Whiskers liked to be both inside and outside the house. I have to say something here. Nowadays, I'd never let my cats go outside. It's not safe for them, and they can harm the environment too. But back then, my parents always let Whiskers out. One time he didn't come back home for 2 whole weeks. I was really worried and sad. I cried every night thinking about him. Then one day, just like that, Whiskers came back. I was so happy to see him. After that, I made sure he stayed inside the house. I didn't want to lose him again. One day, when I was coming back from school, Mr. Brown shouted to me from his yard. "Hey, my cat is in your house," he said. I was confused and told him, "I don't think that's right." Mr. Brown seemed a bit angry and said he had a black cat that he saw entering my house. Suddenly, I realized something. Maybe Whiskers was missing for those 2 weeks because Mr. Brown had taken him into his house. I told Mr. Brown, "I got Whiskers from a place far away when he was just a tiny kitten. He's not your cat." But Mr. Brown didn't give up. He kept arguing, saying that Whiskers was his cat. We argued back and forth for a while. I was getting really angry and told him again and again how I got Whiskers and that he can't be his cat, but he just wouldn't listen. Finally, I had enough. I just walked away and went home. I was really upset. The thought that Mr. Brown might have taken Whiskers and then tried to tell me he wasn't my cat was just too much. So, I felt I had to do something to make sure Whiskers was safe from Mr. Brown. Maybe it wasn't the smartest idea, but hey, I was young. I thought maybe Mr. Brown was mixing up Whiskers with another black cat he had seen. So, with the help of my buddy Jake, I came up with a plan. We put a white stripe on Whiskers' back using bleach. Now I know it wasn't the best thing to do to a cat. Thinking about it now, I feel really bad. But back then, I was only 14 and didn't have many people guiding me in life. All I wanted was to make sure Whiskers was safe. I hope you don't judge me too harshly for it. Thankfully, the bleach didn't harm Whiskers. He didn't get any skin issues from it, and it seemed to work. With the stripe, Mr. Brown stopped bothering him. But after a few months, the white stripe faded. Whiskers was all black again. By this time, though, Mr. Brown had stopped coming around. He never spoke to me or bothered Whiskers. Part of me felt a bit sorry for him. Life didn't seem easy for him. Fast forward a bit. When I turned 18, Whiskers vanished. Gone without a trace. I had another cat by then, Toffee. He disappeared too around the same time. I was pretty sure someone took them. Maybe they got lost, or maybe something worse happened. But I hope for the best. I missed them a lot. Some years later, I moved away. Mr. Brown and his weird house were far from my mind. But when I came back to the old neighborhood, his house was empty. Someone said his sick mom had died or moved to a nursing home. No one knew where Mr. Brown went. A year after I returned, his house caught fire. I heard some homeless folks were living there and accidentally started it. The fire revealed the inside of his house. I saw piles and piles of pots. The place was stuffed with things. It was the only time I had ever looked inside. It was just as strange as I'd imagined. After moving back, sometimes I saw a black cat that looked just like Whiskers. I'd call out to him, but he never came to me. I wasn't sure if it was him. If it was, he seemed to have become wild. He had always been a bit moody, but he was my moody cat. Every now and then I still leave some food out, hoping it's him. I often think about Whiskers and Mr. Brown. Where are they now? What are they up to? I hope wherever Whiskers is, he's safe and happy. As for Mr. Brown, despite our odd past, I hope he's doing okay too. I remember this one day when he joined us at the pool. He just sat by the side, watching us kids play in the water. Out of nowhere, he decided to have some fun and started tossing us into the deeper end. Mr. Meany's actions always made me feel weird and uneasy. I used to have sleepovers at Sarah's place quite a bit. She had this cool bunk bed in her room, and I'd usually sleep on the bottom one. There were times in the night when I'd hear soft footsteps and sometimes a creaking noise near our bed. It was Mr. Meany. I remember distinctly feeling between my legs. This wasn't just a one-time thing. It kept happening over and over for many years. Things changed when Sarah's parents had one more baby. Maybe that was the turning point for her mom. Or perhaps she finally got tired of how he treated her. But not long after, she decided to end their marriage. I was around 10 years old then. It was a relief in some ways, but the memories of those years still lingered. One day Mr. Meany introduced me to one of his buddies from the church. They both were sexual assaulting me. I can still remember a day when I was searching for Sarah. Mr. Meany, with a creepy smile, told me she wasn't home and watched as I played with my dolls. A few years later, during one of our late-night chats, Sarah and I talked about Mr. Meany. To my horror, I found out he had hurt not just me, but also Sarah's sister and brother in the same way. I'm not sure if Sarah's mom ever found out the truth, but what's shocking is that Mr. Meany is still out and about, not behind bars. He even has a new wife and kids now. One time he tried reaching out to my dad, but that was breaking the rules because my family had taken a legal step to keep him away. I also learned that he did something terrible to his ex-wife's things. He set fire to her private stuff in their garden, things like her notebooks, her precious necklaces and dresses. All of these memories, they've hurt me deeply. They've made some parts of my grown-up life very hard. And now, when I think about my own children, I get scared at the thought of them spending the night at someone else's home.